Right, well, good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here. It's particularly great to be here on the Wednesday before the market opens on Saturday, not least because that means I'm not somewhere else doing something else, which I think you can all take as a very good sign. Thank you very much to Market Force and to the conference sponsors for having me here to speak. Perhaps unsurprisingly, I want to take the opportunity to outline some of the very fundamental changes that are taking place in the water sector at the moment. And I want to say a little bit about what those changes mean for our regulation of the sector. And all of the changes that I'm going to talk about today have a common theme, which is really about making the better use of markets in the sector to deliver the outcomes that customers and society expect. So what are the kind of changes that I'm talking about? Well, let me start with the most obvious, not least because it is the most proximate. Retail market opening, the opening of the non-household market in England to competition. This is happening on the 1st of April. No jokes about the date, thank you very much, which means this Saturday. And from that point onwards, we've got 1.2 million business, charity and public sector customers who will be able to choose their water and wastewater service supplier. And it's going to be the world's largest competitive water retail market. Now, we now have 25 licensed retailers in the market with a variety of retail offers through from no change, through to cheapest chips water, through to offers based on reducing customers' bills by improving water efficiency. And we're already seeing activity in the market from TPIs as well. We have already had thousands of customers switch before the market has actually opened. And it's great that through the hard work that Ben and the guys at the market operator have been doing, those customers will be supplied with their new chosen supplier on day one when the market opens. We've seen general levels of awareness among eligible customers of the possibility that they will have to choose their supplier rising. Back in early 2016, they were around 8%, and that's clearly just not good enough. Back in January this year, they'd already risen to 33%. And we know that they're rising further as the campaign that we've been working on with Water UK to raise awareness has rolled on. And in fact, we had feedback from one water company recently who said to us that unprompted awareness in their area had risen from 32% last year to 70% last month, which is pretty good going. The Open Water website seen its user numbers increase from around 3,000 in September last year to 15,000 last month, which is great. Our Twitter following is increasing enormously, and the number of impressions on the account increased from 844 last September to more than 37,000 last month. So things are going very much in the right direction. All of this, the opening of the business customer retail market, takes Ofwat, to all intents and purposes, for the very first time, into regulating a market that is characterised by head-to-head competition. And I don't want to pretend that that is easy. And in fact, although everyone tends to think about economic regulation as big set-piece price controls, I would say that regulation in competitive markets is very much at the sharp end. Thinking's moved on a lot in this area. And there was a time when I think if the market was seen as being susceptible to competition, then the role of the regulator was very much to promote competition, and having successfully done that, butt out, leaving the market lightly regulated on the basis of generally applicable laws such as competition law, consumer law, health and safety and the like. And maybe the regulator would have to ensure that its regulation of monopoly markets, providing inputs into the competitive market, promoted competition through access pricing and things like that, but that was largely it. And I think everybody in this room knows that the basis for that thinking has been shaken very profoundly by a couple of lessons that we've learned over the past few years. And Dermot touched on this just now. I think the first lesson we've learned over the past few years is that not all products and services are equal. There are some products and services that are so important, so fundamental for life and health, that society has a very low tolerance of failure where they are concerned. Essential public services, energy, water, telephony, arguably broadband, some financial services. They're not like chocolate bars or cinema tickets or holidays. And society's tolerance of what it sees as failure in those essential public services, we now know, is very low. Not such a revelation, you might think, but one we did have to learn the hard way. Now, it might be very tempting to conclude from this that competition has no place in these markets, and personally, I think that's wrong. I think competition can bring great benefits in terms of efficiency and service and innovation, and those benefits are precisely needed in those markets because they're so important. But it does mean that we need to think very carefully about the outcomes that society wants to see in those markets. And it means that we may well need to accept a higher degree of ongoing intervention in them than we might previously have expected. The second thing we've learned is that the demand side of markets is as crucial for their success as the supply side. Well, what do I mean by that? Essentially, I mean customers matter. Well, duh. But this does present real challenges. And as we've seen from the results of the recent CMA investigation in energy, customers don't necessarily find the markets that we regulate particularly exciting. And it can be difficult to get customers to engage, even some businesses, for example. If you think about SMEs who don't have utility buying teams, who have hundreds of other things to think about. Now, this revelation about customers mattering and the importance of the demand side is not great news if you're a regulator, most of whose toolkit is squarely aimed at getting suppliers to do stuff. Now, I do think technology is going to move things on here, and as you will know, increasingly intelligent and dynamic search engines that learn about customers' preferencing, things like blockchain switching, are really changing the market here. But they have upsides and downsides. So on the one hand, technology provides better ways to talk to customers, find out what they want, and translate that into a purchase, taking on the onerous and unattractive tasks of search and switching. But on the other hand, technology also creates huge opportunities for price discrimination. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but to the extent that we used to be able to rely on a few active customers to keep suppliers honest and on their toes, we now need more active customers to achieve the same result. So, what does all this mean for Ofwat? What does it mean for our regulation of the about-to-be competitive business customer retail market in England? Well, over the last few months, we've been setting up a new programme, our Market Outcomes and Enforcement programme, to do just that. And we're now transitioning what was our retail market opening programme into that. And I want to take the opportunity to make 5 points about how we see our work here. So, firstly, we see it as critically important that we maintain effective oversight of the new market. We need to know how it is working and what it is delivering for customers, the good and the bad. And we're putting in place a monitoring regime to enable this to happen. So we'll be monitoring a wide range of metrics, including information on switching within and between retailers, identification of different types of customers and their use of third-party intermediaries, information on customer experience and on conduct of market participants. We also intend to look at correspondence and complaints in relation to eligibility, marketing, switching, market structure, contracts, and other relevant things as well. We'll be complementing this with a periodic survey of customers to understand their experience in the market and their degree of satisfaction. And we'll also be establishing a separate panel, specifically in relation to small and medium-sized enterprises, so we can understand their experience in the market. And of course, we'll be keeping a keen eye out for any compliance issues. So we will be well informed. What I should also say is this doesn't mean we will rush to intervene, and we're not looking for headline-grabbing opportunities here. We recognise that newly competitive markets take time to bed down, and that too much regulatory activity can crowd out a healthy competitive dynamic. But we also recognise that a key ingredient of any competitive market is trust. And those involved in the market, crucially including customers, need to trust that it works effectively and fairly. And trust is an issue. Some business customers in the new water market are well able to look after themselves, but others less so. And some may have had bad experiences in other markets, so we can't pretend that we're starting with a blank sheet of paper. So while we won't rush to intervene, we will have a low tolerance where we see behaviour that would undermine trust in the market, and in particular where we see bad behaviour that leads to a poor experience for customers. Secondly, as you'd expect, given what I've said, we will pay keen attention to the demand side of the market. And in fact, we've been doing an awful lot of that already, and I was talking earlier on about the work we've been doing with Water UK to raise awareness of eligibility to switch. We do recognise this is only a start, and that as the market develops, we're going to need to retain our voice with customers. And that's why we'll be keeping the Open Water brand, if you're familiar with that, and the digital channels through Open Water that we've been using to talk directly to customers. And we also recognise that we need to continue to work with others, perhaps including particularly CC Water, to ensure that customers are not only aware they can switch, but make an active choice to be engaged in the market, and if they are engaged, make informed choices. Thirdly, and it links to my previous point, we will be using all the tools in our toolkit to help ensure the success of the new market. Now, I've already spoken about some of the things that we'll be doing to raise awareness and promote informed engagement, but even in relation to service providers where we have more traditional powers, we see a need to be pragmatic and innovative. Now, some companies have, more or less explicitly, asked us for some kind of moratorium on enforcement action in the early stages of the new market. Let me be clear, this is not going to happen. But what I would say is that we are clearly focused here on what we're trying to achieve, which is a good customer experience in a well-functioning market. And we're going to use whatever tool we believe is most effective in achieving this. Now, it could be Competition Act enforcement, and we've refreshed our competition guidance recently to enable us to do that. But it could be other enforcement tools too, and we have powers within licenses and our casework strategy that will inform this. And we also expect to take a really keen interest in the codes and whether they are being complied with. And certainly from my perspective, that customer code of practice is particularly important here. And we're also open to using softer tools, such as open letters to particular groups of players in the market, speeches or reports to highlight issues in a timely way. But let me be clear, if we do that, it will be with the expectation that those in the market will step up and respond. Because if they don't, we will have to look at other options. Fourthly, we will proactively look to learn from others. Now, anybody who knows Ofwat will know that learning is very much within our DNA. It's one of our 6 values and it underpins everything that we do. But it's particularly important in this area, where we're conscious that other markets, perhaps with some similar characteristics, have been open to competition for some time. So we've got a fantastic learning opportunity here. Perhaps the most obvious one is from energy supply markets. Now, I should say, and you've probably touched on this earlier on in the conference, but there are some really important differences between the new water retail market and energy supply markets. And notably, in the retail market for water, the model is a thin model based on retailers reselling wholesale water that remains supplied by regulated monopolies. So 90% of the value chain remains regulated. And they'll be competing, we hope, as much on customer service and value-added services as on the ability to do retail more efficiently, because the scope there is obviously more limited. But having noted the differences, there are some lessons that we can learn here. So one of those lessons, I think, is about the importance of TPIs. And that's both in terms of their ability to make the market work, but also in terms perhaps particularly of a subset of their number, of their ability to engage in some of the less desirable behaviours in the market, stuff that we just don't want to see. Now, we're very conscious that we do not have the power to regulate TPIs. We've asked government for that power, and we don't yet have it. But we are putting in place principles for voluntary codes of conduct for TPIs, and we're going to be transparent about who has signed up to those and who hasn't. So customers will be able to see whether they're signing up with a TPI that provides that protection or whether they're not. We've also learned lessons in relation to the potential for some business customers, and I'm talking particularly here about micro businesses, to be vulnerable customers. And that's why we've included some additional protections for them in our customer code of practice. And I'll give you some examples there. We've introduced a 7 calendar day cooling off period for those customers. We are requiring retailers to provide some information to those customers in writing. We are requiring retailers to provide information in writing as soon as possible. They can't switch a micro business until they've had confirmation from the micro business that it's read and understood the information provided to them. And we've also, for example, banned automatic contract rollover without the explicit written consent of the micro business customer. That's just some examples. There are other things as well. So we've learned a lot, I think, already, and we're going to challenge ourselves to keep learning as we go. And I think it's important to enter into the new market with an explicit acknowledgement that we will not always get things right. I'm really confident that the new market will bring considerable benefits, especially in terms of service and innovation, but it will not work perfectly from the outset, and in fact may never work perfectly. But the key is for us to know what is going on, respond appropriately and in a timely way, and learn from that experience. Fifthly, and finally, in relation to the retail market, we're also very keen to capture lessons from the business customer market for other policy areas and other aspects of our regulation. There's a very specific requirement on us to do this in respect of Wales. The Welsh Government, in its strategic policy statement to us, has set a very specific challenge that we must ensure that customers in Wales, who obviously don't benefit directly from competition because it's not being introduced there, do receive improvements in service as a result of the opening of the business customer market in England to competition, and we'll have to think about how we do that. I'm also expecting retailers and retail competition to reveal information about wholesale services that will be really useful as we set wholesale price controls in PR19. And of course, we will all be watching the business customer market in England very carefully to see what can be learned in relation to any government decision to extend competition to residential customers in England. Now, I'm conscious I've talked a lot about competitive retail markets, and you'll understand why I've done that. But although retail competition is the most obvious way in which Ofwat is becoming, in a very real sense, a market regulator, it isn't the only way. And I've been talking for a long time now about the potential that we see for markets to enable and encourage value creation within the wholesale part of the value chain as well. Now, I should stress that's very different to retail competition. We don't see markets in the wholesale part of the value chain being characterized by the kind of vigorous head-to-head competition that we hope will happen in retail markets, or indeed of the type that would enable us to step back and stop doing price controls. But we do see a lot of scope for markets to present companies with a wider set of options and choices about how they provide water and wastewater services. And we see them revealing really valuable information about where greater efficiency lies and giving the opportunity to take those efficiencies. And as you'll know, many of you, through our Water 2020 policy framework, this is becoming a reality. We're expecting companies to look at more options for water trading. I still can't believe that in the face of climate change, population growth and the pressures we've got on water supply at certain times, and particularly at certain places, we still have the same circa 5% of the total public water supply being cross-border traded that we did at the time of privatisation. It just seems very counterintuitive. And as we also see scope for markets to develop in relation to bioresource treatment, transportation and disposal. And we see a lot of scope there for companies to provide those services across boundaries rather than investing unilaterally and therefore inefficiently. And of course, this is changing the way that we regulate at the wholesale level. So you'll know we're setting separate price controls for water resources and bioresources to reveal information and focus company decision making. We're also requiring companies to provide information to inform third parties of opportunities on water resources and bioresources markets. So for bioresources markets, this information is going to be based on location and volume information for sludge processing, so that third parties can see the potential opportunities there to trade with the incumbents. For water resources, it's easier because it's based on data that companies gather as part of their water resource management planning. And we'll shortly be publishing guidance on exactly what type and form of information we'll be looking for there. But what is really encouraging is that we already see companies engaging in both markets and identifying really good practical opportunities for trades. As many of you will know, we also see scope for what we call direct procurement for customers, where a water company might look at a substantial new project that is needed within its area, something that is greater than more than £100 million whole life TOTEX. And what we're saying there is we would expect the company to have asked itself very explicitly whether it is best placed to do this project, spec it up, build it, finance it, operate it, or whether somebody else was, and perhaps to test the market there. I think this is potentially a very significant reform, and we're debating at the moment how best we can encourage it, and in particular, how much of a framework we need to put around it, which might, on the one hand, help to reduce transactions costs and get the market going, but of course bring with it the risk that we might stifle some opportunities and innovation. But it's been really good to see the levels of interest in this build from companies, from investors and third parties. Some of that interest is translating into thinking that is actually informing our policy. So, give you an example. Thames Tideway, Severn Trent and Anglian Water have sponsored a report from First Economics that was published, I think, in February this year on direct procurement for water industry projects. Really, really interesting reading. We've commissioned a report from KPMG. We will be publishing that alongside our PR19 methodology consultation in July, so more to come on that. So, if you add all this up, you've got the introduction of competition in the business customer market in England, and you've got greater use of markets in respect of water resources, bioresources, and direct procurement. We are taking some major steps in the evolution of the water sector right now. And they're steps that have big implications for the sector, but also we recognise for us as the regulator as well. And I'm really conscious that when you establish markets, when you create that opportunity for buyers to meet sellers and transactions to take place, they don't stand still, they develop their own dynamics. And as a sector and as a regulator, we will all need to get used to there being more players, a greater diversity of players, a faster pace of change, and more extensive, more powerful disruption than we've ever really seen in water before. Now, I think that's a fantastic thing. It's going to reveal information, create choice, spawn innovation. But I'm also not denying the challenges it will bring as well. And the fact that another thing that markets do, as Dermot will testify, is to shine a light on those challenges, making them and how we deal with them very much more visible. But I should also put on the record that I'm feeling really confident that we can rise to those challenges. And I'm not alone here. I really do think there's a genuine sense of optimism and a quiet confidence in the water sector right now. And for good reason. And as I've said, after decades in which not much changed in the sector, we ushered in some big changes to the way that we regulate in PR14. Difficult for companies, difficult for investors to get their head round initially. Not perhaps initially best handled by us either. I think we had a collective wobble for a moment. But we came together and we ultimately agreed this was the right thing to do, the right way to go. And I think everybody now agrees that the 2014 review brought valuable additional flexibility for companies, better enabling efficiencies, and providing better incentives for companies to do more of what their customers need and want. And after PR14, we said we wanted to build on that success. We said we wanted to go further in the same direction. And to be honest, and I remember standing up just after we did the review and saying this, I wouldn't have been surprised if companies had thrown their hands up and said enough. But they didn't. And in fact, by engaging with us through the marketplace for ideas that we've been using in Water 2020, they have helped co-create the Water 2020 policy framework. And they've genuinely engaged in a constructive way to agree the licence reforms that we need to implement that policy through PR19. And let's not forget that over pretty much the same period, by which I mean the last 5 or 6 years, the sector has gone from a position of believing that retail competition would never happen, and some of them thinking it had no place in water as well, to actually opening the world's largest water retail market. And that feats involve not only big challenges for individual companies, but an enormous challenge of maintaining trust and a genuine sense of shared endeavour between companies, government, the new market operator, and the regulator. The sector today is a proven capability to embrace change in a way that delivers benefits for customers, society, and of course investors. So although, as I said earlier, I'm sure we will have some bumps along the road as markets develop in the sector, we will get through them. And I can't wait to see what the future holds. Thank you.